With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree. Look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
And good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics. Thank you whether you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Periscope, traditional radio signal, however you're listening to us, and there's a lot of different ways to listen to us. We certainly appreciate you listening to us here on Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hatred. So let's delve into the news of the day, and one of the big things, and we are going to get to talking about the shooting and some of the media blowback and the fallout, because of course it has been 48 hours, so I'm going to give my political takes on some of the things that are being said. But before we do that, I have a really odd story to present to you that involves the Senate race that is going on right now, and I know that we've talked an awful lot about that. It's garnering quite a bit of headlines, which it seems odd to even be talking about a story like that simply because we're so far away from it. I mean, it really does feel like that election cycles start the day after the election takes place, and unfortunately that's kind of the world that we live in with this big 24-hour news cycle. But in the state of Alabama, this is a hotly contested Republican primary because they know that if they win the Republican primary, there's very little chance that they will lose against Doug Jones, being one of the most unpopular public figures in our entire state. And so the odd thing here is that Tuberville finally takes a stand when it comes to something. He finally says something that does not appear to be merely parroting talking points from Donald Trump and basically answering every question with "I like Trump." And you'll remember that if you've been watching the program and watching my coverage of Coach Tuberville, even though I like Coach Tuberville, I think that he's a good person. And I mean, that shouldn't surprise anybody, me being an Auburn fan and being a big fan of Tuberville throughout his football career. I think that this is yet another illustration of how way in over his head Tommy Tuberville is when it comes to this, because for the first time since he announced his candidacy, he actually said something critical and, frankly, I thought not altogether unfair, although there is an aspect of incorrectness of this, and we'll go over that, of course. But Tuberville actually said something that was critical of President Trump, which I was shocked at, because you'll recall that my running criticism of him this entire time has been the guy just, his answer to everything is "I like Trump." When you ask him whatever it is, if you were to ask Tommy Tuberville his favorite ice cream flavor, you would almost think, based on the way that he's answered other questions, it would be, well, Trump really likes chocolate ice cream, and I think Trump's great, so I like chocolate ice cream. I like chocolate ice cream and Trump. God bless America. That would have been Tuberville's answer, because so far all he has tried to market himself, kind of like DeSantis in Florida, as a little mini Trump, that if you elect me, I'm going to be a senator version of everything that Donald Trump has done. And so to actually break ranks with the Trump ideology, to actually say that there's something that Trump hasn't done incredibly well, is a very new thing for Tuberville. And so he was giving this speech the other day at the Shoal Republican Club, and he said, "I'm ticked." He didn't use ticked, but he said, "I'm ticked off at Trump that our vets can't get health care. And if I ever get to see him, I'm going to tell him that. You said you were going to fix it, and you ain't fixed it, and it ain't fixed. And that's who we ought to be taking care of, these young men and women. I've had them come to me and cry, 'Coach, we can't get health care. Nobody will take care of us. 22 vets a day, every day, are committing suicide. We can't take care of them. We won't take care of them. We're paying for illegals to come over here. everything they're getting, cell phones, healthcare, everything they want, that's Donald Trump's fault. That's his fault. He's got to get it done. There's one of the most important things that I think we need to do because we send young men and women over to fight for us, put their life on the line, and we don't take care of them. What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, to a degree, is this a fair criticism? The spirit underlying what Tuberville is talking about, I think, is 100% true. It makes no sense that we are providing things like schooling, healthcare, and general public services, welfare checks, all of these other amenities to non-citizens, and we're not actually giving them to our vets, which are not only citizens, but people that actually worked for the federal government, served our country. If there's anybody that the federal government ought to be taking care of, it would be them. And that wouldn't even be a welfare program. That would be part of the programs we have set up specifically for federal employees. And so this is absolutely a fair criticism in the undertow. Now you got to dig to find it, because some of the details that he piles on here are incorrect, and I'm going to go over why that's the case. But this is kind of what I meant, and this goes back to what I've said about Tuberville before. I think at his core, Tuberville is a good guy, and he's trying to do the right thing. But this is not the way to handle it. Because I think Tuberville sincerely believes this stuff, that he is sincerely upset that our country seems to care more about and prioritize more the health and well-being of illegal immigrants coming into this country, that we're paying more for them than we are for our own veterans to get the care that they need through the VA or through vouchers that come from the VA to help them get the care that they need, however you do it. In this case, I do think that Tuberville has a kernel of truth underneath all of this that is correct, that he is rightfully enraged about. Because, of course, there is a difference in righteous outrage and just being outraged for the sake of being outraged, which unfortunately I think is probably the more common one in our country now, that people just hunt for things to be mad at. But this is a legitimate criticism until you look at the fact that the person that he's going after about all this is Donald Trump when you consider this. Because Donald Trump is not a king. He does not have the power to unilaterally say, you know what, we are spending money on illegals, we're not spending them on our vets. I tell you what, put them for the vets. No, Trump can't do that. And that is not it is not within his purview to do that. Congress is the one that sets spending and appropriations, and Trump approves them. He can't just unilaterally say, all right, we're going to spend no money on illegal immigrants, we're going to divert those funds to helping fix the VA. Now, let's remember that a campaign promise of Donald Trump was to fix the VA, and several improvements have been made, but it is far from perfect. And there are legitimately veterans, people that served our country, and some of them have actual physical injuries that you can see, some of them have mental injuries that you can't. And the point is, there are still problems. There are still people slipping through the cracks. There is a better way to do the system, and we need to work on creative solutions to do that. But I don't think that it's fair to say that it is Trump's fault exclusively, which is what Tuberville seems to be doing. And it's also not Trump's fault to blame him for the 22 suicides a day. Yes, that is horrific. And yes, if we improve the VA system, there's a good chance that we could whittle that number down some. Help make sure these people are getting the health care that they need. But here's the thing. Do we really think that we're going to whittle it down to zero? Do we really think that if we just put together this system or that system, if we just get the right combination of government programs and government laws in place, that there are going to be no soldiers that ever commit suicide? No. Now, is that an excuse not to try to improve it? Absolutely not. We do need to improve it. But the point is, you have a little bit of a utopian view here. And it's really the same thing that the Democrats do. They think that if we can just hit that perfect combination somehow of just the right government programs and just the right implementation of those programs, that we'll create a utopia where bad things just don't happen. And that's just not the way the world works. Lord knows that I would love nothing more than to figure out a way for our soldiers to not have things like PTSD and not fall into depression. And us have no suicides from that. And even better, if we could figure out a way to eliminate war altogether to where they don't have those issues in the first place. I mean, yeah, that would be great. That would be ideal. But that's not the world we live in. And some of the horrific things that these guys go through on the battlefield, even if they have help, it may not necessarily cure them. Even if they have the help that they need, it may not be enough. And you also have to consider that there are a lot of these people that commit suicide that never seek help, that they just go undiagnosed until finally the depression gets them. I'm not an expert on this stuff, and I don't claim to be. But I do know that it is impossible for us to just get that perfect combination of government programs and laws and policies in place to where it eliminates the possibility of a soldier suicide altogether. That's not going to happen. I think that we can do things to bring it down, and I think that we ought to. I think we bear that responsibility. We owe that to them. But I also think that the way that Tuberville's presenting it here, he presents it as almost a utopian view, and that's not something that is helpful to the people listening, and it's not helpful to the vets. Is it a fair criticism? Maybe to a degree, because Trump did say that he was going to solve this problem in the campaign. I don't think it's a realistic criticism. And that's been one of the problems with Trump since the onset, right? And most people just kind of understand this, that it's sort of baked into the idea of who Trump is, that you understand, okay, Trump is saying things that are not realistic. He's making big, bold promises that he never intends to follow up on because that's who Trump is. And I'm not saying that it's not fair to hold the president to that standard of taking him literally. I'm just saying in this circumstance, you also need to realize that, yeah, Trump kind of promised that, but he also, even when he was making that campaign promise, I don't know that he had any notion of eliminating the problem completely. So I think that that's really where it all goes down to. I will say this, though. I do, at the very least, even though I have problems with the criticism itself, I do at the very least appreciate that Tuberville finally said something that wasn't 100% positive about Trump, because this is the first time that's happened in the entire campaign. Like I said, everything out of Tuberville's mouth so far in this campaign has been, well, Trump's just great and I like Trump, and so that's why you should vote for me. I mean, it's good that he finally tried to think for himself and have an original thought. I think that it was executed poorly, and his criticism, like I said, isn't all that realistic. But hey, at least he tried. I mean, maybe it's like the first time you ride a bike, you just fall flat into the dirt, and you're like, well, at least you tried. I mean, yeah, it's still a faceplant, but it's a faceplant where you at least had the courage to get on the bike and try something new. And I think that's what's going on with Tuberville right now. But this was sort of highlighted by his political opponent, Arnold Mooney, who was tweeting about this earlier. This is Arnold Mooney's tweet. Coach Tuberville is a good man, but he's dead wrong about President Trump. Nobody loves our veterans more than Trump. Blaming Trump for veteran suicides is wrong. Coach Tuberville owes our president an apology. Now, from Mooney's perspective, I don't see anything wrong with that. Because it does seem like, if you're reading that or listening to it, that he's basically blaming Trump for veteran suicides. And that's not Trump's fault. He certainly didn't create the problem in the VA. I think that he bears some of the responsibility for some of the issues it's having now because the man's been in office for a couple of years, and so ultimately the buck does stop at the president. But you can't blame Trump for veteran suicides, and I think Mooney is reflecting a reality in that. Maybe he's also trying to score some political points because, God bless Arnold Mooney, I think that he's a good fellow, but I don't think he has a prayer in the Senate race because his name recognition is just that bad. Hope I'm wrong. Love to see him in the Senate. But I don't think that he's got a prayer, honestly. I don't think he'll even wind up in the runoff. But anyway, so that may be at least part of it, but what's interesting about this is that Tuberville backtracked almost immediately. almost immediately Tuberville starts trying to undo what he did, trying to go back on what he said at the original speech. And this is the tweet where he tries to clarify there. Career politicians and never Trumpers like Arnie have nothing to run on, so they attack others. My point is this. Donald Trump has done more for our veterans and our military than any president we have ever had, and he was dealt a big mess by Congress and Obama. We're never going to improve health care for our veterans if we recycle the same old tired politicians. We can do better, and we must. And then, of course, tags Donald Trump and Arnold Mooney in that. So this is a very swift backtrack. And what's fascinating about this is that he goes off into this thing. He doesn't want to admit that he's wrong. He doesn't want to admit that he made a mistake. And so he does a complete 180, says the exact opposite of what he was saying in the speech, instead of, well, Trump said that he was going to fix it and he hasn't, and this is his responsibility to, oh, Trump's done everything for our veterans. He's the best veteran president that we've ever had when it comes to taking care of the veterans. He's doing everything he can. He inherited a mess from Obama. I mean, that's a flip-flop of epic proportions, and he did it in less than 72 hours. Because Mooney evidently called his crap on it, and then Tuberville, instead of admitting, you know what, I did speak out of turn, or maybe I was a little too harsh, or I really needed to rethink that before I said it, I was just kind of thinking out loud, doesn't say any of that, doesn't admit that he's wrong. He's saying, oh, well, the only reason that Mooney's attacking me is because the guy has nothing to run on, and he's a never Trumper, and I'm the real Trump guy. He reverts automatically back to the guy that he was 10 seconds before saying everything that he did criticizing President Trump. And what's hilarious to me about this whole thing is that doesn't that sound exactly like what a politician would do? Because Tuberville is trying so hard to bill himself as this sort of mavericky outsider, somebody that's he's the rebel alliance against the empire. That's who he's trying to paint himself as. And yet, the stuff that he does, like this, makes him sound very much like a career politician. I realize he's not one. But isn't this what politicians do all the time when they get caught in something that makes them look bad or they realize is untrue? They just try to capitulate and try to explain how they're not sorry and they didn't actually do anything wrong, but I'm saying everything the opposite of what I was saying 10 seconds ago, and by the way, I was right both times. Even though I'm completely contradicting what I just said, I was right then and I'm right now. That makes no sense. And that is the epitome of what people do not like about politicians. And so Tuberville just absolutely stepped in it. Now, even though I disagree with some of the finer points of what Tuberville was saying, even though I think the spirit underneath it was correct, and that he has a legitimate problem with what's going on, I think that his criticism falls on deaf ears and ought to, because it's not a good critique of the situation that's going on. It's not accurate. That it would have been best for him to say, you know what, I mischaracterized that, I apologize. But even if he hadn't done that, anything would have been better than this. Even if he had not backtracked at all and said, nope, sticking to what I'm doing, at least I would have respected the courage it took to say that, especially considering he's running in a very pro-Trump state. May have disagreed with what he actually wound up coming up with, but the point is I would have at least had to say, you know what? Tuberville at least has some political courage here. He is at least showing that he is willing to go to bat and stand by what he says, but nope, not doing that. I mean, this is as much a political move as I've ever seen. And remember, I follow this stuff for a living. So he paints himself this way very much like a politician. And here's the question that I would ask. Again, let's ask the questions to see if Tuberville is actually correct. Has Trump done more for our veterans than any other president ever has? Now, don't get me wrong, Trump has been great for the military. I don't think that anybody with walking around sense would deny that. There have been a lot of pro-military things that Trump has done, and I'm not even just talking about funding. The demeanor, the way that he talks about the military, there's some things that he's done that I disagree with too, but overall, Trump has been a very good commander-in-chief when it comes to the military, keeping morale up, that kind of thing. That's something that Trump excels at. But has he really done more for veterans than any president ever? More than Reagan? More than George Washington? General George Washington? Are we really supposed to believe that? And so Tuberville seems to fall to prey to the same old devices that he did, which got him into this mess in the first place, which is he's not thinking before he's speaking. He's just rambling off with crap coming out of his head and not thinking about, A, is what he's saying true, and B, is it going to be politically helpful? Because A should be the first priority, but B should also be considered when you're running for a public office. And then he calls Mooney a career politician and a never-Trumper. Yet Mooney hasn't been in the legislature that long, and he's at the state level as a representative. Hardly somebody that you would think of as a career politician. I think that he took office, in 2015? Mooney's relatively new to the game. Now, granted, he has a longer political career than Tommy Tuberville, which is, 0. But, I mean, I guess that's something that you have to do if you're running from the outside and you've never been in office before, is that the only thing that he can run on, since he doesn't have a record, is to say that I'm an outsider, which granted is popular right now. But seriously, Tubbs, your move is to say, oh, well, that guy, he's only criticizing me because he's a career politician and a never-Trumper. Is Arnold Mooney a never-Trumper? Because I don't remember Arnold Mooney saying anything like that when Donald Trump was running for office. And keep in mind, I'm saying this as a never-Trumper. I was a never-Trumper. Before the man took office, I was. And so I wouldn't even look at being a never-Trumper as being something that would disqualify you or something to shy away from. That's what I did. I was in that movement. I don't remember Arnold Mooney there. I don't remember him saying anything about that. I remember other people, even in the state of Alabama, that were never Trump, including myself. To my recollection, Mooney was not one of them. And so Tuberville is just playing the label game. He doesn't know how to hit back, and he knows that he's been attacked by Mooney, so the only thing that he knows how to do is just throw labels that he's hoping people will not like. It's very Democrat-esque. That when all of a sudden, when you get met with a argument that you don't know how to counter, you're like, oh, he's a racist. Oh, he's a nationalist. Oh, he's a white nationalist. Oh, he's a Nazi. That's what Tuberville's doing right now. He can't come up with a countermeasure, so he just throws a label that he knows people in Alabama don't like to try to defer attention away from the fact that he just got curb stomped by Arnold Mooney, which is embarrassing considering Arnold Mooney's poll numbers. But that's what happened. And Tuberville's only response is, he's just a career politician and never Trumper. You shouldn't listen to his criticism of me, even if it's correct. Just like the left does. Furthermore, on that front, he says that Arnie has nothing to run on. Yeah, that's kind of hard to bring up when he has a record, and by the way, a darn good one, I might mention. A very conservative record. And you have literally nothing. I mean, don't get me wrong, political outsiders can win. Trump being in the White House is proof of that. But when you're talking about nothing to run on, you literally have nothing to run on. You don't have a background in that. Which is fine. You can do that if you want. Everybody has to start somewhere. But it's kind of weird to say that someone has nothing to run on when they have a really solid conservative voting record and you have nothing. Again, I'm not saying that Tuberville would necessarily be horrible at the job just because he's never held a public office before. Sometimes I think that would be a positive thing, a point in their favor. But saying they've got nothing to run on doesn't make any sense, especially from someone who's never actually been in public office. So it's just kind of a case of, what do you have? And what this all goes down to is this is not the way that a leader is supposed to behave. If Tuberville wants people to consider him as a leader, as somebody that is worthy to sit in the U.S. Senate to represent the great state of Alabama, he's got to actually have some kind of conviction. None of this mamby-pamby crap where you say something and then realize the voters didn't like it and then automatically try to pretend like that's not what you were actually saying. Look, if you're going to take a strong stance on something, then take it and stick to it, or have a momentum moment, realize that you messed up, and then say that I made a mistake, and then stick to that conviction. But you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, and people don't respect that, and people, generally speaking, can see through it. The weird thing about this whole fight is that the way that this narrative is unraveled is that Tuberville's reaction has all the elements of an AOC tweet. Think about it. And I'm not saying that Tuberville is AOC. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying this tweet that he responded to Mooney has all the elements of an AOC tweet. Think about it. First of all, he paints himself as an outsider that's being picked on. AOC, everything she does, the first thing she does is, well, I'm the victim here. She tries to figure out some kind of way to make herself into the victim. He also tries to explain how he was right then and he's right now. Every time AOC says something dumb, she does exactly this. She doesn't apologize or admit that she's wrong. She tries to figure out a way to try to explain how, well, I'm right now and I'm right then, even though what I'm saying contradicts what I was saying then. Then the appeal is pure emotion. I mean, that's really all that's going on here, is that Tommy Tuberville had an emotional reaction to something one of his political opponents said and lashes out in anger, just like AOC typically does. And then the only other thing that it is missing is that Tuberville did not call himself a woman of color. If he had done that, he would have had the full Monty. He would have had the entirety of what a AOC tweet is. So that is the one thing that was missing. It was missing that one element. So if Tuberville had been like, I don't know, hashtag women of color, okay, then it would have had everything. But there is that one distinction there. What I do find funny about all this is that for Tuberville claiming to be, and I believe that he really is, claiming to be a Trump guy, everything that he does in this little story is right out of the Democrat playbook. And unlike President Trump, who unfortunately sometimes is notorious for doubling down, Tuberville doesn't double down. He says the exact opposite of what he was saying. The guy doesn't stick to his guns on this stuff. And if you're not going to stick to your guns, you need to admit that you're wrong. Tuberville does neither of those things. This is all straight out of the Democrat playbook. All right, we've got a lot more to talk about. We've got the whole situation with guns and the media, and we will talk about that when we come back in just a minute.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will be from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 2 through 10. And a centurion's slave was sick and about to die. When he had heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built our synagogue." Now Jesus was triggered upon hearing this and said, "None of the good things he has done matter, because he is a slave owner, and we must never admit that anyone that ever owned slaves is capable of doing anything good. Furthermore, instead of asking me for help, you should have passed universal health care by now so that he could receive treatment for free." Then Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying, "Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am also a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, "I say to you, this man is engaged in systematic oppression. He is clearly engaging in wage slavery by controlling the means of production to exploit the labor of those around him. Then Jesus gathered up a mob and protested on the centurion's lawn all night long, with torches and signs reading, "Down with the patriarchy," terrifying him and his family. We never really found out what happened to the centurion's slave. Wow, so inspiring. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible, and remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking with us through the break. Man, the shootings that happened, we had, 4 in the span of a week? And I think 3 of them happened within 72 hours of each other. Some of the response to it has just been really interesting. Now, typically speaking, I don't necessarily do a ton of coverage on the media's reaction just because unless there's a specific point that I want to make and a media reaction to it kind of accentuates that and I want to use it as a jumping off point. Typically what I do is I ignore most of the media spin on it, but what's interesting about this one is the media actually tried to do their job for a change and then very quickly decided that that wasn't worth it. So the media, weirdly enough, actually did some real journalism and it wound up blowing up in their face. Which is an odd feeling, I'm sure, that when you try to actually do your job and be objective, that the first response that you're met with is anger. So here's what happened. CNN, they had this headline, Dayton shooter's Twitter feed shows extreme leftist views. That was the headline of the article. Checked it, I believe, this morning. Checked back a little bit later, they changed it a little bit. And just to give you a sampling of what was going on in this article, some of the things that were said, which they had all backed up and confirmed, they said this. In addition, a Twitter account that appears to belong to, they say the shooter's name, and I don't say the shooter's name on the air because I believe that that contributes to copycats. But they say the shooter's name here. Retweeted extreme left-wing and anti-police post, as well as tweets supporting Antifa or anti-fascist protesters. Huh. So he's an anti-police guy and a pro-fascist guy. But I thought that everybody was saying that this is some kind of white supremacist, that white supremacy is the thing that we need to combat to be able to stop mass shootings like this, except this guy supported a well-known violent group on the left, not the right. And this is according to CNN, not exactly a right-wing source. But this is what they found. So they did some actual journalism, they provided people with the facts, and then let them make their own decisions, reach their own conclusions. They continue on in the same piece. Millennials have a message for the Joe Biden generation, hurry up and die. And that is a quote directly taken from the shooter on his social media feed. So this guy is someone who does not like the middle of the Democrat Party. He wants to be on the extreme, the social, which, I mean, is an Antifa person, shouldn't surprise anyone. But he doesn't like the Joe Bidens, the Hillary Clintons of the world. He wants to go with somebody that isn't an establishment Democrat, somebody that would be more in line with, presumably Bernie or AOC, that kind of thing. Somebody on the more socialist wing of the Democrat Party. Now, I'm not saying that he supported them per se. I'm just using that as an example because I do want to be very clear on that. The user's Twitter bio reads, he/him, anime fan, metalhead, leftist, I'm going to hell and I'm not coming back. And one tweet used the hashtag #HellSatan. So not exactly your typical run-of-the-mill Republican. I mean, you're going through this. First of all, he identifies himself using his pronouns because he presumably feels this is an important thing to do in a world where you support the trans agenda. and then goes off into anime that really has no political leaning one way or the other, metalhead, leftist, and then uses the hashtag Hell Satan. So not exactly the white conservative Protestant men that they try to paint as being the problem in these shootings. And that's the problem that the media continues to engage in. Then they continue on. In the hours before the Dayton shooting, the Twitter account liked several tweets about a shooting in El Paso that left 22 dead, including one supporting gun control, and others that called the El Paso shooting suspect a terrorist and a white supremacist. Also pretty interesting. You've got the El Paso shooting that happens just hours before the Dayton shooting, which, if I'm not mistaken, 13 hours was the exact timeline. And 13 hours before this, he's reading the news about the shooting going on in El Paso, and he's liking tweets that are calling this guy a terrorist and white supremacist and calling for stricter gun control policies. He's liking all of those things not long before he goes on a shooting spree himself. Interesting. So this guy clearly holds a lot of leftist views, and it also is evidence that supports what I've been saying and what the stats have been saying for a very long time now. And that is that if you're looking at these things and trying to figure out what the cause actually is, you really don't need to be looking at whether guns were the cause or violent video games are the cause, which, by the way, there was another study, a very good read, I have it up on my social media right now, that it's a very conclusive scientific study that shows there is no link whatsoever between violent video games and aggression. And I will actually go through that in just a second. But if you're looking at that, what it shows that what is really spurring this on is that mass shootings happen because mass shooters are inspired by other mass shooters. This seems to be the case if you're looking at the stats. There's a reason that these shootings tend to happen in clusters. You remember in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting, we had several other mass public shootings happening within the next few months. In this shooting's case, we had 3 shootings in a very short amount of time in about 3 days. And so this really does lend credibility. I wouldn't say it proves, but it certainly lends credibility to the idea that other people see mass shootings and then they want to copycat that person, and that emboldens them to go out and commit mass shootings that they had been at the very least contemplating or been at high risk of committing in the past, because they want the fame, they want to be plastered up everywhere, all of those things. And that's a trend that we've been seeing for some time now. And then this other part of the article, the account retweeted messages supporting Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, as well as posts against ICE agents, including one that said, "These people are monsters," and multiple posts condemning police and supporting Antifa protesters who often use violent tactics. So not only was this guy in support of Antifa and their violent tactics, he was also reposting things and tweeting about how terrible ICE is, which echoes, the fact that AOC and Bernie Sanders have said things like ICE is a terrorist organization, that they're running concentration camps, all of those things. This is not somebody that is a stereotypical person on the right. They just aren't. The facts do not support that. And yet, CNN, after seeing this, changed their headline from "Dayton Shooter's Twitter feed shows extreme leftist views" to "Dayton Shooter had obsession with violence and mass shootings, police say." Now, is the second headline accurate? Yeah. If you're looking through the information that we just read to you, he absolutely was obsessed with violence. He absolutely was obsessed with mass shootings. I agree with that. In fact, I just told you I think that may be the most important thing that came out of this article, is that we get to see that there is yet another example giving credence to the idea that mass shooters tend to copycat one another. This is something that is well known. And if this had been the original headline, I don't think that I would have thought to be critical of it at all. The problem is, They originally had a different headline that very clearly said that their findings were the shooter's actually very leftist. And then they changed it because evidently they were getting some kind of blowback for saying that. That's why they updated the article and put, well, it was violence and an obsession with mass shootings. They're trying to craft the narrative yet again. And by the way, you should know also that the other shooter, not this one, the other one from El Paso, or not from El Paso, committed the shooting in El Paso, that his manifesto, and by the way, we have, because you remember we said we couldn't confirm it yesterday, it seems as though police and other law enforcement officials are confirming that this manifesto was written by this individual. So we can say with more assurity that this was the manifesto that he crafted. But the El Paso shooter's manifesto was anti-consumerism and global warming. Did it contain things about white supremacy? Absolutely. Was it a long racist rant? Yup. But this guy was also very against global warming, climate change. He was a climate change alarmist that was constantly worried about the environment, and he hated consumerism. See, now that to me is interesting because we're not hearing all of that. The first thing that we heard about this manifesto, which was not inaccurate, I agree with it. I mean, because it says what it says. You follow the facts where they go. He was a white supremacist, and there's a good chance that he went where he did, drove an hour out of his way to go to a place that was more populated by Hispanic people. And he specifically thought, well, I'm going to have a better chance of killing illegal immigrants or legal immigrants, either way, by shooting in this place in El Paso. So yeah, it absolutely was motivated. I would even not hesitate to say that it was the primary motivating factor behind this. But they're ignoring the fact that this manifesto also talks about a lot of left-leaning ideas. And I would actually say that white nationalism is a left-leaning idea. But even if you don't subscribe to that philosophy, it still has some mainstream left ideas on his side. But here's the thing that this all boils down to. I don't like the fact that we always try to parse through what the political affiliation of these shooters were. Now, sometimes, if it's specifically politically motivated, that is helpful. I mean, if this was an actual act of domestic terrorism, and in El Paso it seems to be, then at least some insight into their politics makes sense. But as a general rule, I am tired of every time we have a mass shooting, whether or not it's tied to politics at all, that we try to figure out and break down what they were aligned to. As if, for example, somebody that voted for Barack Obama when he was up for election, that automatically makes that person, see, that's a point for the Republican side. That shooter, he was for the Democrats. It doesn't work that way and shouldn't work that way. This isn't a contest. These are crazy people that are willing to kill others for no reason other than they want to kill them. Their political affiliation should be the least of our worries. Even in cases when it's actually politically motivated, it should at the very least take a pretty distant back seat to the fact that this person was a psychopath that was willing to kill others. So even though these guys both apparently held extreme leftist views, I don't look at that and gleefully say, see, we've got the Democrats. That's in bad taste. And the families of the victims deserve better than that. To having the death of the people that they love used as a political football and a bludgeon to beat your political enemies with. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Elizabeth Warren is doing. I don't know if you saw this, but earlier she was literally fundraising on the shooting. She was saying that the reason that you needed to give money to her was so that she could defeat Donald Trump and enact gun control that would end all of these. She's literally just hours after this thing takes place. I guess it would have actually been about 48 hours when this thing went out. Or at least that's when I saw the story. Before the bodies are even really cold, Elizabeth Warren is trying to use the death of her fellow countrymen to make some change for her reelection. It is absolutely sickening, the political games that we use in this country. Sometimes it happens on both sides. I'm not saying that the right is completely clean on this. But I mean, really, Elizabeth Warren? It's just absolutely makes me sick seeing some of the things that these people are willing to do to try to get money to win an election. But hey, the New York Times, not to be outdone by CNN, the New York Times did some objective reporting of Trump's comments in response to the shootings. Because, as you all recall, President Donald Trump gave a statement on it last night, and the New York Times decided to report on what the president said, which is, pretty rational for a newspaper to reprint the sort of air and the exact words that the president was using and give people the information and let them decide. So here's what happened with that. This was the original headline that the New York Times ran with. Quote, Trump urges unity over race. And if you listen to what the president said, and this is one of the quotes that they used in that article, these sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul. Yeah, well, that would be Trump doing exactly what the New York Times headline claims that he did. Trump urges unity over race. I don't know how you misconstrue that or why they thought that that was inappropriate, but immediately after this happened, the SJW mob descended upon them like a pack of vultures. So those in power that the social justice warriors took to Twitter and were angry that the New York Times was saying this about the president's comments. So you look at AOC over there, let this front page serve as like a reminder and stuff of how the white supremacy is aided by and often relies upon the cowardice of the mainstream institutions. So calling the New York Times cowardly for literally just reprinting what the president said. And then you got surfer dude Beto O'Rourke. Dude, unbelievable and stuff. So Bob Francis O'Rourke, that's his hot take on it. Oh, but they're not alone. There is more. You got Cory Booker. Lives literally depended on you doing better, New York Times. Please do. Then you got Bill de Blasio, another candidate on the Democrat side. Hey, New York Times, what happened to the truth is worth it? Not the truth, not worth it. Kristen Gillibrand. Again, someone else running for president on the Democrat side. That's not what happened. Look, here's the thing. You don't have to agree with everything Trump says. I certainly don't. But the issue here is that essentially these guys, and also Joan Walsh and Nate Silver, also lefties. Joan Walsh was angry and said that she was going to cancel her subscription to the New York Times. Nate Silver was also angry about it. And then they wound up changing the headline. They actually, after seeing the blowback, after seeing how angry people on the left were at their headline, they actually wound up changing their headline to Trump assails hate but not guns. So in other words, instead of saying the basic tenor of what Trump was saying last night, which was accurate, is that he urged unity over racism. Now they're saying, well, he didn't say anything about guns. That's what the New York Times changed their headline to. So saying, okay, he was against hate, but we really wanted him to say something about firearms and controlling them. What this all boils down to is that the left said to the New York Times, we don't want your journalism here. We don't want it. When you just print what the president said and put it out there to the masses and let people decide for themselves, that's dangerous. That's outrageous. That's unbelievable that the New York Times would just do that. How dare they let people think for themselves? See, what they wanted was the spin. They wanted a crafted message put out there in a specific way so that people would ingest it and think a certain way about the president's remarks. That's why they ran with the second headline instead of the first. They don't want journalism They want activism. Because that's what activism is. You craft a message a certain way and put it out there to make people think the way that they want to. That's what the opinion page is for. That's what the editorial page is for. And even though I try to avoid that, as often as I can to try to be at least somewhat objective and then give my honest analysis afterward, that's what opinion shows like this are for. That's not what a journalist is supposed to do. A journalist is not supposed to be a soldier for one side or the other. Look, saying that Trump urged unity over racism, which is a true statement, by the way, is not necessarily the New York Times saying, but he really meant it. You can report on what the president says, and there are going to be people on the left that assume that every word out of President Trump's mouth is racism. And if you don't believe me, look at our last week's news cycle with Baltimore, repeating things that other leftists had said for years. But all of a sudden, when Trump says it, well, then it's racist. Even using some of the same words as him. Still racist just because Trump said it. Now it's racist that Trump was saying it. There are going to be people out there that read that thing and say, okay, well, that may have been what he said, but it's not what he really meant. But that's fine. That's what the reader is supposed to do. They're supposed to be given the facts by the journalist and then make their own decisions. But the left saw this immediately and said, no, we can't have that. We need to tell people what they're supposed to think. We need to characterize the speech in such a way that it reflects negatively on Trump. And that's exactly what the New York Times did. And by the way, if you were watching online at this whole spectacle play out, granted, I didn't see it before the reversal had already happened. I was a little late to the party. But if you're looking back through the history and looking at the original headline, there were conservatives on there saying, thanks for taking an objective look at it. Actually thanking the New York Times for doing so. But as soon as the left got angry about it, they reversed course. They did basically what Tuberville did in the first part of that, which is they just completely did a 180 and pretended like they didn't. Why is that? Because they know where their bread is buttered. They know that conservatives that saw the headline in passing and appreciated it, and then looked through the article and said, hey, they actually did some objective coverage. They know those aren't the people that are subscribing. That's not the stockholders of the company. And the stockholders don't want journalism. They don't want objectivism. They always say that they want an objective media, but the second they actually do something objective, they say, nope, none of that. Can't have that anymore. You need to tell people that they're supposed to dislike Trump. That's what your job is, according to them. The truth is, when you let people decide for themselves, when you actually give them enough information and let them make their own choices, there are going to be people that disagree with you. I'm okay with that. Evidently, the left is not. Another thing that the media has done over and over again that I've seen no telling how many times is they're trying to tout this number that there have been, I think it's 238, something like that, mass shootings this year, which is absurd because what they're trying to do there, the reason that they're getting to that number, is that they are using numbers for gang violence. In other words, they're defining it not as the FBI defines it, which is 4 more people who are killed, not shot, killed, and 4 more people killed, and it's not related to gang violence and it's not family members. So, God forbid some crazy person murders his family of 5. It's not a mass shooting. If he walks into his house one night and shoots them all up, that's not a mass shooting because it doesn't happen in public. So that's what the average person would consider a mass shooting. It's a pretty good definition when it comes to things like gang violence. First of all, people have to die. And second of all, if it's gang-related violence, then it's not some anomaly, some mass shooting like a school shooting, Columbine, Parkland. Those are the things that people think of as mass shootings, not 2 gangs going to war with each other in the streets of Chicago and taking one another out. And so this is the irony of the whole thing. Whenever you come out and talk about that and talk about how gun homicides or gun crime are a much, much bigger deal, and statistically they are, than these mass shootings that people tend to gravitate towards, all of a sudden they say, well, you're racist, and the only reason that you're bringing that up is because you want to bring up that black people kill black people. Well, I mean, they do at a higher rate. I mean, that's just statistically accurate. And as I've always said, facts can't be racist, they're just facts. But nonetheless, they'll say that about any conservative that even attempts to bring that up when the conversation is about mass shooting. But then when they want to bolster the numbers of mass shootings, they immediately go to the largest number that they can find, and the way that they bolster those numbers is to include gang violence where people were shot, even if they weren't actually killed. You can't have it both ways. You got to pick one. Either a mass shooting is the thing that we all think of as a mass shooting. In other words, some person or people goes out and commits an act of violence that hadn't previously, that aren't connected to a gang or organized crime. And it's not like a family member. It's something that actually happens out in public with someone shooting indiscriminately into people. That's a mass shooting. What they're talking about is not. They're just trying to get the big headline, get the big number, and that's why they're trying to bring that up. Do you understand why, to people on the left, do you understand why people on the right don't want to give people on the left the benefit of the doubt after listening to this? I hope so, and I'm not saying this to just stick it to you. I really am genuinely reaching out here. After hearing all of this, do you understand why the right doesn't want to give the benefit of the doubt to people on the left? I spent a large chunk of my show yesterday talking about Senator Doug Jones and how I thought that Yellowhammer News, which is a general conservative-leaning website, how Yellowhammer News was going out of its way to put words in Senator Doug Jones' mouth, and they were not extending him the benefit of the doubt. And in this case, I thought that they were overreaching, even though I like Yellowhammer News and I like the author of that article. And you'll remember that I said yesterday that the reason it is so important for us to do that is because it's the right thing to do, and whether or not they extend that same courtesy to us, that should not affect the fact that we treat others the way that we would like to be treated. But looking at this, don't you understand why that's really hard for people on the right to do? Do you understand that now? And while I'm talking to people on the left, and I hope you are out there listening, I genuinely do, and feel free to comment and give some feedback, tell me why I'm wrong. That's fine. But while we're talking to people on the left, I find it so odd that they're rallying around this idea that we should be having gun control, and Lindsey Graham, who is another senator on the left that happens to have an R behind his name, is talking about red flag laws, and there's a myriad of reasons that that's a bad idea. I'm not going to cover that today because we don't know exactly what the legislation says or what it proposes, so I'm going to wait for it to actually come out. Don't want to jump the gun, pun intended, on this legislation. But the reason that Democrats are salivating at the mouth over gun control, and that they're coming out about this like they always do, those are the people I'd like to talk to right now. Let's just say that you're somebody on the left that believes pretty much everything that the media says about Trump. That he's a bigot and a racist, and he hates black and brown people, that he's actually a white supremacist, that he wants to tamp down anybody that disagrees with him. And remember that this is a guy who, even though he's done some things that I like, these are some things that I disagree with, refers to the media as the enemy of the people, and has referred to people in Congress even that he does not like, refers to them as traitors. And let's say that you buy the narrative, even though it's not true, of the kids in cages, and Donald Trump just wants to get rid of all the black and brown people. He wants to block Muslims from coming in. He wants to keep Mexicans and other people that aren't white from coming into the country. And he wants this racially pure nation. And although that's a load of bull, if you buy into that, why do you want them to take your guns away? Seriously. Do you really want Donald J. Trump, if he really is Hitler and he really is a fascist and all those horrible things that people on the left keep saying about him, if he really is all of those things, Do you really want him deciding who gets guns and who doesn't? And especially, do you want them deciding that based on things like whether or not you've said something that could be dangerous? Because in Donald Trump's mind, and by the way, I don't completely disagree with him on this, Ilhan Omar saying some people did something in reference to 9/11 or equating the US to Al-Qaeda would be a pretty good indication that she's a dangerous person that doesn't need guns. Do you really want the government in control of whether or not you have the weapons to defend yourself, if that is the case? This is why it is a bad idea to give any government, regardless of who they are, that kind of authority. Because your guy won't always be in office. And yeah, conservatives were, I thought, reasonably worried that if President Obama had free reign and could do whatever he wanted and didn't have to deal with Congress or that pesky Constitution, that he would have immediately said, go confiscate the guns, get all of them. But if you're on the left and you really are that worried about President Trump, why are you not equally concerned that President Trump will look at that and say, yeah, everybody that reads Snopes, Salon, everybody that's a fan of Vox, everybody that donates to Bernie Sanders, those people are clearly dangerous. I mean, we had that Bernie Sanders supporter a couple of years ago try to kill the Republican members of Congress. So clearly what we need to do is anybody that worked for Bernie Sanders or supported Bernie Sanders, we got to do something about that. You see why that's an issue? Don't surrender your liberties to anybody. Don't surrender your God-given rights to self-defense to anybody. Because your guy won't always be in office. And eventually, there is going to be somebody who you don't trust to decide what is and isn't dangerous, making that decision for you. That's why you always err on the side of liberty and preserving individual rights. Now, the Democrats, sort of a testament to this, this was their reaction to everything that was going on. Many of them decided that it was time for them to go out and actually blame Trump for the shooting. So here's a montage of that put together by the Washington Post, if it actually ever comes up.
You see a president who, in his first speech as a candidate for the highest office in the land, described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, has been warning about the threats of caravans and asylum seekers who he's described as animals and an infestation, despite the fact that immigrants commit crimes at a far lower rate than do those who are born in this country, despite the fact that we are now in one of the safest cities in the United States of America, safe not despite, but because it is a city of immigrants. The president's language, his rhetoric, has produced the kinds of hate crimes that we saw in El Paso yesterday, but we've been seeing across this country. They've been on the rise for each one of the last 3 years.
Well, every time this happens, we say never again. We say we're going to do something. We say it's going to change, and it hasn't. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that this same debate and this same cycle has been going on my entire adult life, and I'm wondering what it will take to get the sense of urgency, to get Washington to actually respond, especially when Americans, frankly, in both parties, want to see changes, at least some basic common sense measures on gun safety.
Mick, why has the president downplayed the threat of white nationalism?
I don't think he has. Go look at what he said yesterday. He condemned this without any reservation whatsoever, John. So I don't think that's fair.
Well, wait a minute. Look, can I read the president's words? Because back in March, he was asked directly, do you see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world? And his answer, I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have a very, very serious problem. He downplayed the threat of white nationalism.
There's one person that is responsible directly for that shooting in El Paso, and that's the shooter. At the same time, as our national leader, you have a role to play in either fanning the flames of division or trying to bring Americans of different backgrounds together. Most presidents have chosen to try and bring people together. This president very early on made a clear choice to divide people for his own political benefit.
One of your 2020 rivals, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, told me this morning that he believes President Trump is a white supremacist or a white nationalist. Do you agree?
I do. Look, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, but I think all of the evidence out there suggests that we have a president who is a racist, who is a xenophobe, who appeals and is trying to appeal to white nationalism. And, you know, it breaks my heart to have to say that this is the person we have who is president of the United States.
So there you have it. Democrat after Democrat after Democrat trying to tie President Trump and his rhetoric to the shooter in some way. And what's especially ironic about that is that these are not pundits or peons or people on the left that just have some kind of radical talk show. This isn't the Alex Jones of the left, for example, which I've always said Alex Jones is actually the Alex Jones of the left. But these are people that are prominent, that have a lot of influence, that are running for president, so essentially running for the leadership of their own party, trying to directly connect President Trump's choice in rhetoric and actions and attributing that as at least a contributing factor, if not one of the primary causes of mass shootings, which is ridiculous on a number of levels because we had mass shootings long before President Trump took office. We had mass shootings, even white supremacist mass shootings in the case of South Carolina. We had those while President Obama was in office, and nobody was blaming him for the divide, even though he had a lot of very divisive language. Nobody blamed him for that, but all of a sudden now that Trump's in office, we're supposed to forget everything that happened more than 15 seconds in the past. And it's especially ironic for Bernie when you consider this. Bernie Sanders had a guy who was a supporter of his that actually worked inside his campaign, who tried to kill Republicans specifically because they were Republicans at a softball game. I know I spoke to some of the people that were there. I even spoke to Mo Brooks, who may have actually helped save Steve Scalise's life. And when all of that happened, I don't remember any conservatives coming out and blaming Bernie Sanders or even Bernie Sanders' ideology for that. Everyone that I heard, and I'm sure there were some, obscure ones that you could dig up that were saying that, but all of the main guys that I heard, the guys that show up on News Radio 1440, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, they were saying the shooter is responsible, period. That was it. He had a dangerous political ideology that was based on violence, but that wasn't Bernie Sanders' fault. Bernie Sanders didn't tell him to go do that. And so because of that, generally speaking, is all the prominent conservatives that I heard, none of them blamed the Democrats for that. And yet, on the other side, when the situation is reversed, the Democrats cannot find a microphone fast enough to try to connect that with Donald Trump's rhetoric and then to also promise, well, this is the reason that you need to elect me because I'm going to end all this. As if them being in the White House is going to magically stop all mass shootings. Didn't work with Barack Obama, ain't going to work with you. This is so incredibly despicable that they're trying to do this, and like I said earlier with Elizabeth Warren, actually profit off of the deaths of their fellow Americans to try to use that as a tool to bolster their own poll numbers and try to get elected. It's absolutely sick. And let's also look at the differences in the two. These two guys, these abhorrent, evil pieces of human garbage that decided that they were going to kill people, including, in one of the shooters' case, their own sister, they both had far-left radical views. Now, in the case of El Paso, had some pretty far radical right views as well. But in both cases, had some radical leftist views. And for Bernie Sanders, who's actually had in his past a legitimate campaign supporter, someone that worked for Sanders, commit an actual act of domestic terrorism to try to pin these two guys, one of which was granted a white nationalist, but also an eco-terrorist. And the other guy who had extreme leftist views trying to tie that in somehow to, well, President Trump's rhetoric is really the reason for that. Here's another question. Why did that shooter choose Walmart? Granted, Walmart is a popular public place, and so if he was just looking for mass casualties, it's certainly not a bad choice. But why did he choose Walmart specifically? If you've looked through his manifesto, one of the themes that pops up is he is against consumerism. He's worried about the environment, that our consumerism and our wastefulness is going to destroy the planet. And that's also the reason that he wants to eliminate some people, because he believes that they would contribute less waste, contribute less greenhouse gases, whatever. However that works in his, insane mind. That was part of his rationale. I think that the guy targeted Walmart on purpose. I don't know about the other shooting that happened at Walmart, but this guy, I think he did that on purpose because of his anti-consumerism shtick. And who has been, for the past 2 months, talking about how evil and wicked and greedy Walmart is, and how they are literally engaged in slavery by paying their employees only $11 an hour as opposed to $15? Oh, right, that's Bernie Sanders. Again, I'm not blaming Bernie Sanders for the shooting. I'm just saying that it would be far easier to connect Bernie Sanders' worldview and ideology with the El Paso shooter than Donald Trump. Because even if you don't like Donald Trump, even if you think he's secretly a closet racist and white nationalist, which obviously these people do, Bernie Sanders just said that, even if you believe that, Donald Trump would still at least be a closet white nationalist and racist. Bernie Sanders openly has animosity towards Walmart. And so it's far easier to connect those two dots. And yet Bernie Sanders is trying to say, well, Trump's really the reason. He's really the problem. He's the reason that this is happening, even though Bernie Sanders has said stuff that you could much more easily relate back to this person's ideology than Donald Trump could. Much easier. Can we just all not try to use a tragedy like this for political gamesmanship and to make a point? That's all I'm asking. Can we treat each other like human beings and not try to bludgeon each other to death with these dead American citizens? I think that would be a good first step. And my advice to the Democrats and my advice to the left would be, you can't demonize half the country and then all of a sudden say, well, it's just such a big mystery that they don't want to work with us and they don't trust our coverage of this and trust what we have to say on it or think it's valuable. You can't say, well, it's people that are clinging to their God and their guns and NRA members and people that own guns and don't want to give up their gun rights. You can't say that and say that they're the reason that these people are dead, that they're the problem, and then throw up your hands in the air and say, oh, it's this big mystery that they don't want to work with us or don't want to listen to it. They don't want to hear our common sense gun reform, to take all their guns. You don't get to do that. And it should be no surprise to you when people that you demonize constantly are not receptive to your message. Let's go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
And today's Daily Dose of Stupid, which we are going for a lighter note here, McDonald's. McDonald's gets caught up in the same thing that just happened with CNN and the New York Times, which is they got the left angry and they tried to appease them and ironically really stepped in a pile by doing so. So what happened is, you've all seen over the past year, we did a big segment about it about a year and a half ago on the show, where everybody, because of a single video of a sea turtle that got a plastic straw stuck in his nose, and granted the video is hard to watch and it's a sad thing that sea turtle was the victim of some negligent idiot not wanting to find a trash can to throw a straw away. But suffice it to say that that was what was going on, and that one video drove this whole giant movement to try to ban plastic straws and get them moved to paper straws and all this other stuff that made no sense. I even did a video earlier this year about paper straws. But they rolled out the paper straws in the UK. McDonald's, trying to appease the social justice warriors, rolled out their their paper straws as a replacement to plastic in the UK. And they were just using that as a testing ground, as an experiment, and it seemed to be working really well because they had designed a new paper straw that felt like a plastic one, so you didn't have that weird texture of a paper straw in your mouth, which, by the way, is awful. If nothing else, I wouldn't use a paper straw just because of that, even if it actually worked like a plastic one did. But they made it really thick so that it's not going to collapse, that it doesn't dissolve in the drink. And so basically, they fixed a paper straw that actually works and does what it's supposed to do, which is allow you to drink without it being a fiasco. And they were getting solid results. People weren't complaining. The straw worked really well. Here's what's funny, though. It turns out that the new straws are not recyclable. They had to make it so thick to make it actually work and not collapse on you like paper straws always do, that it's impossible to recycle the things. And what's really even more funny about that is their old plastic straws were recyclable. These aren't. So McDonald's, in their big grand gesture to try to fix the problem and appease the social justice warriors, no telling how much money they spent trying to engineer this thing, figure out the way that it would work to where it would not deter people from getting their drinks, but also be made of paper. They didn't stop to think, well, our old straws were recyclable and these actually aren't. And this really does go back to a tenet that I've had for a very long time, which is when you try to appease a mob, they're never going to be appeased, and you're probably not going to do any good trying to appease them. So in trying to do what they wanted them to do, reacting to the outrage culture, McDonald's wound up creating a product that's actually worse for the environment than the original. And you'll remember that something that people talk about all the time, plastic bags started out as exactly the same thing. People were worried that all these paper bags were being used and then just thrown away. It was killing the trees that we were using so many paper bags. And what happened? Over the course of a very long time, all these companies moved to plastic bags so that they wouldn't have to use the wood and the paper to make the paper bags. And now they're complaining about the plastic bags and saying you should go back to using paper. So you can't please people. That's just a general rule about this world. You can't please people. If you try to please everybody, you're only going to wind up creating headaches for yourself, and they won't be appeased in the first place. So that's where McDonald's is one time. It's just funny because Starbucks tried this originally, and then McDonald's is trying it now, and it just constantly blows up in these companies' faces because they can never please everybody. They can never actually get the social justice warrior mob off of their back. And the thing is, global warming alarmists and the other sections of the social justice warrior mob, they care about feelings, not results. The reason that they want to force companies to use plastic straws is not because they think it's actually better for the environment, even though they probably genuinely believe that. They're doing it because it makes them feel good. That instead of having the issues where they are using products that they think are bad for the environment, it makes them feel good. Whether or not it's actually effective really doesn't matter all that much. It's the same thing with the war on poverty or a lot of the other leftist ideas. We've had the war on poverty for 50 years and we've still got the same rate of poor people. And yet somehow this is a good idea. Not because it actually does good, but because it feels good. In the real world, you have to be worried about results. And the results on this little McDonald's experiment came back and they were not favorable. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
And Chaplain's Report today, there actually is a news story tie-in that I want to give with this, and I'll just give you a brief overview of it. So evidently there is a former minister named Joshua Harris who wrote a book called I Kiss Dating Goodbye. So he was kind of seen as a dating guru for Christians. And I'll be honest with you, I'm just going off of the research that I've done today because before the story came out, I had never heard of the guy before. So I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball on this, but I hope that you'll bear with me. So a while back, and this is a guy who's a well-known, somewhat successful Christian author. A while back, he was seen marching in the Vancouver Gay Pride Parade, which was a little disturbing and a little offsetting for a lot of people that had considered themselves fans of his. And this is not long after he announced that he and his wife were going to be separating, which is pretty startling for any big name or very visible Christian author. But that's especially true when you consider that this guy literally got famous writing a book about relationships and how to navigate a romantic relationship. I mean, especially when you consider that, that's something that is really staggering. And he has also been photographed and posted these pictures himself, hanging out with gay activist Matthias Roberts and Trey Pearson. So you can kind of see the signs going here. Well, he recently announced that he is no longer a Christian. And in one of the statements, he actually said that I've heard that you can be a Christian and support the gay movement. By the way, you can't. But I'm not there yet, and I no longer consider myself a Christian. So this guy literally traded the all-saving power of the gospel of Jesus Christ for gay activism and seeming woke to people. So here's really where I want to go with this. There's a great quote, and it's not from the scripture, it's not a proverb, but it is true. There's a great line actually from the TV show Smallville, where Lex Luthor, if you know anything about Superman lore, you know who Lex Luthor is. He says, the road to evil is a journey, not a light switch. And he's right. Very few people just all of a sudden wake up one day and decide, I'm going to go ahead and be evil. As C.S. Lewis once said, the surest path to hell is a gentle slope. One that's so gentle they don't even realize they're on that downward slope. And so it reminded me of a scripture from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7:15 through 20, where Christ says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then, you will know them by their fruits. Now, what Jesus just said in a very succinct fashion is that if you want to be able to figure out who the false prophets are, all you have to do is look at the fruit of their labor. What are they actually producing? What is coming out of their life? And he's 100% right on that. This is a case where you can see that playing out in real time. And granted, we have the advantage of hindsight with this one individual because there are some people that really go the way of bad fruit, but you don't see that for a long time. Or if they even sometimes die before that revelation is made. But this is the reason that I want to tell you, not because I want to bash this guy, but because I want to use it as a cautionary tale against listening to people like this when you see the signs coming. You see, his revelation that he's no longer a Christian just happened a few days ago. But all of these signs started a long time back. He was still referring to himself as a Christian and a minister when he was taking pictures with gay activists, when he was marching in the Pride Parade, and even when he announced that his wife was separating from him. All things that should be a pretty big red sign, hey, this guy is not living out the message of Jesus Christ. He is not living out that doctrine or that discipline. And so, in all of this, I want to remind people that you are going to face certain things when you're talking about your spiritual leaders. If you happen to be in some kind of connection with someone who is a false prophet, the warning signs are going to be there. They were very obvious in this case, and that's why I think that it's a good case study. You see, you don't notice that the tree is dying right away. You start noticing, just like Jesus said, that the fruit's going sour. You start noticing that what is being produced isn't what was being produced earlier. It's not good fruit. And you start noticing that all of a sudden, wait, these are thistles, not grapes. Those warning signs are there for a reason. And Jesus says that's how you're going to know when people are not being straight with you, because there's been this lie, especially with the gay movement, that has been out for a long time now. And actually, we just talked about it. He just relayed that to us, that you can support the gay movement and be a Christian. You can't. Not possible. You can't openly support people engaging in a sin and being proud about it and also saying that you're a disciple of Jesus Christ. Can't be done. If you do that, you're automatically not inside the fold of Christ. Not because homosexuality is some kind of big super sin. That is true of any sin. You were committing it in open in front of everybody and being proud about it. That would be true of lying. That would be true of anything. It would be true of cheating people. It would be true of adultery. It's not because it's related to homosexuality. It's the attitude towards sin that is being adopted here. And the thing is, that bad fruit, you could see it coming for a while, and then all of a sudden you realize he admits that he's no longer a Christian. Okay, the tree really is dead. That bad fruit wasn't just popping up. It was there for a reason. And so the purpose of Christ saying this is he's trying to warn his followers. These people are going to come. They're going to claim the mantle of Christianity. They're going to claim to be a sheep when they are really a wolf. They're going to claim to be people that follow me when they really advocate for the exact opposite of what I want for you. Jesus knew these people were coming, and he wanted his people to be ready. He wanted them to be able to see the warning signs ahead of time and prepare themselves. And so when you have people that claim Christianity, but are engaged openly in sin and endorsing sin, that's a pretty big red flag. Hey, this is some bad fruit, and we don't need to be partaking in it. That tree is going bad, and it's going bad fast. Doesn't mean that this guy is lost forever. I don't know much about his religion. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot about who he was before this. He may have been someone that was in the fold at one time and isn't now. I don't know. But I know that what he's doing now is evil, and different Christians have tried to justify looking at prominent Christians who don't have a problem with homosexuality and don't denounce it, and tried to use that as the standard that they can say, okay, well, it is okay to be pro-homosexuality and also be a follower of Christ. See, because they've put their faith in the person, not Christ. They put their faith in the spiritual leader, the false prophet, instead of the gospel. And that really is the difference. Because you cannot follow Christ. You cannot do it. You cannot claim to be a disciple of his if you are telling people it is okay to engage in sin that endangers their soul. Can't be done. Your primary job as a Christian is to make sure that you and your household and your neighbors and all the people around you, as many of them as you can, that you share the gospel with them and let them know that Jesus Christ can save them. And so telling them that they're fine and they don't need to get sin out of their life would be doing the exact opposite of that. This is why it's so important not to disregard the signs. Because the earlier that you can say, nope, that person is clearly a false prophet, hopefully the more people you can save from being drawn into that. Because the devil is very crafty. He has agents everywhere trying to tell people that they do not have to live the way God wants them to live. And yes, that includes in the church. That includes people that are claiming Christianity regardless of what branch of Christianity they belong to. His agents are everywhere. And we need to be aware of them, and the way to do that is to look at the fruit and tell whether or not it's good or bad. That's the way Jesus described it to us, that's the way he told us to do it, and that's the way we need to. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.